Good afternoon. I'm Walt Bauer, and I'd like to welcome you to the Human Development Institute's third spring seminar. We welcome all the participants who are joining us online. Our presenters will provide an opportunity for questions this afternoon, and we welcome questions from all of our participants. Please type your questions in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Should you have any questions about CEUs, you can contact me. Please take a moment at the conclusion of the seminar to complete our brief evaluation. The evaluation will be sent to your email address after the seminar. It is really helpful as we plan for upcoming seminars. The title of the seminar is Justice for the Whole Self, Learning to Be a Better Ally. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Kathy Shepard-Jones, the Executive Director at the University of Kentucky's Human Development Institute.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Walt. I am, in fact, Kathy Shepard-Jones. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the Executive Director of the Human Development Institute, or HDI. Our mission is to promote the inclusion, independence, and contributions of people with disabilities and their families across the lifespan. And we do this through education, through research and evaluation, information sharing, leadership and advocacy across Kentucky and across the nation. And what a great way to wrap up a long week, I must say. On behalf of the Institute, our staff and students, I want to welcome you all to the final 2020 Spring Seminar Webinar Series event. And what a way to end the semester, right? When we originally planned this seminar as a collaborative between HDI and our partners, it was intended to be a face-to-face event, a way to bring together University of Kentucky students with leaders who have strong voices and who would help to bring the story of the experience of disability to life. We wanted to encourage interaction and dialogue and rich learning for our community. However, as we know, events of the past months have really changed the way that we work, that we teach, and that we're learning. We could have rescheduled, but instead we thought we had a more rare opportunity by proceeding as a webinar today. We can model a strong learning community that isn't fettered by the constraints of a physical environment, that's accessible, that's useful, and is important. We can make the world a smaller place and come together to seek understanding, to appreciate new perspectives, and to try to move forward from this place and time where we are now, having learned lessons that will help us to rebuild a more inclusive global community. Now, Walt mentioned that at the conclusion of the event, everyone will receive an evaluation, and we ask that you do that to give us your insights. What's special about this evaluation is that we've also included an item that's aimed at university students. So if you're sparked with a curiosity about conducting research, HDI has ways for you to get involved. So we can follow up with anyone who self-identifies that interest on our evaluation. All right, enough for me. So I am now pleased to introduce our moderator for this event, who is going to help us set the stage for the afternoon. Dr. Deborah Harley is a professor at the University of Kentucky's Department of Early Childhood, Special Education, and Counselor Education. She is a certified rehabilitation counselor, a licensed professional counselor, and her research interests include cultural diversity, LGBTQ, substance abuse, aging, and ethics. Beyond her own department, she's truly embedded across the campus community. She is affiliated with HDI, the Department of Gender and Women's Studies, the African American Studies and Research Program, and the Center on Research on Violence Against Women. We're so grateful to Dr. Harley and our panelists for being here with us today. Dr. Harley, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Shepard-Jones. My name, again, is Deborah Harley. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And again, welcome to the HDI Seminar Series. This one on justice for the whole self, learning to be a better ally. This panel is a partnership of the University of Kentucky Center for Equality and Social Justice, the Disability Resource Center, Students Against Social Injustice, and the Counselor Education Program. Funding is provided by the University of Kentucky's Inclusive Student Program Grant. Just to give you a brief description of the seminar, ableism is the intentional or unintentional discrimination or oppression of individuals with disabilities. Following in the tradition of the disability justice movement, Nothing About Us Without Us, this seminar is a panel of national and local disability rights advocates who will discuss the intersection of disability with other forms of marginalization. The panelists will also explore how youth and young adults can engage with the disability justice movement. The panel will continue by sharing strategies that students, researchers, practitioners, and community members can use to become better allies. There are several learning objectives related to this seminar. The first one is to develop and increase awareness of the history of the disability justice movement. The second objective is to understand how the connection between ableism, racism, sexism, and classism impacts access and inclusion. And the third learning objective is to identify strategies and ways to become better allies in the community. Our panelists for this afternoon include Felissa Thomas and Angela Fober-Bratt, Chastity Ross, and Winter Sherman. I seem to be losing my voice here. So throughout this moderated question and answer format, panelists will share about their experiences, and we will pause several times throughout the discussion for youth that may have questions. So at this time, I would like for our panelists to introduce themselves and to tell us a little bit about themselves. So we will start with Felissa. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Please introduce and tell us something about yourself.
Okay. My name is Felissa Thompson. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm from Winsboro, South Carolina. I am a social worker, activist, writer, consultant, public speaker, and I have my own organization and blog called Ramp Your Voice that I started 7 years ago that looks at disability from an intersectional lens. I am very glad to be here today to have this conversation with you all. And that's pretty much about me.
Thank you. Angelia, can you tell us something about yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I was adopted from India and acquired transverse myelitis when I was 4 months old, and so I use a manual wheelchair. I also have a service dog. His name is Colton. I'm a two-time Paralympian in the sport of wheelchair racing and an assistant professor at Vanderbilt University. At Vanderbilt, I'm in a department of human and organizational development, so I teach future school counselors, clinical mental health counselors, and so forth, as well as community psychologists. And my main research interest is about disability identity development and how individuals adjust to disability across the lifespan and find those connections to the broader disability community. A few things in terms of disability activism that hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about throughout our time here today. I was 14 years old when I hired my own lawyer and took on my school district in federal courts for discrimination on the basis of disability. I've been involved under the previous Obama administration in terms of advising on disability policy issues and continue to do that type of federal work with the U.S. State Department and others. And I should also say that I use what is called identity first language interchangeably with person first language. So to me, disability is a point of pride, and I'm very proud to be disabled. So you might be hearing that in some of my comments and discussion point today. And I just wanted to name that and to have that be out in the open right up front. So thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you very much. Chastity, please share with us something about yourself.
Well, I'm really unfortunate that I have to follow that because I won't have nearly as many things to say. My name is Chastity Ross. I'm from Richmond, Kentucky. I use she, her pronouns. I am a wife and a mother. I'm a wife with a wife, which is its own excitement there. And I also have two children, one adopted and one by birth. I have a congenital birth defect. I've been disabled my entire life. So I kind of have I have a perspective that's unique sometimes because my disability started from birth, where a lot of times you will meet people along the way that are just in different spaces with disability, and when it was acquired or when it became a part of their life. My job as a vocation, I am a case manager for adults and children with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. When I was growing up at Shriners, they always said that I was nosy and bossy, and now I get paid to be. So, if you're lucky, you always can find a job that you're good at and that you're naturally just gifted to do. So that's a little bit about me. I've been on the Disabilities Council for years. I was the chair of the Developmental Disabilities Council for Kentucky for altogether about 6 years or so. Loved advocacy work there. Really enjoyed being the chair of that council and traveling and speaking on behalf of Kentuckians with disabilities. So that's a little about me.
Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, Winter, please share something with us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Winter, and I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I'm autistic, and I'm an organizer with Autistics United Kentucky. I'm a self-advocate. I'm an organizer, an activist, a writer. You might say a public speaker, but you'd more likely find me with a megaphone than a microphone. And oftentimes I share different perspectives than people are used to hearing at these things. My whole life is dedicated to the struggle for the liberation of disabled people. And I hope you enjoy the panel.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and move forward now with our first question for our panelists. And this question is, what are some of the hiccups and successes practitioners and rehabilitation professionals need to know to be efficient and effective when working with people with disabilities?
Okay, I'll start. Some of the hiccups and successes that practitioners and rehabilitation professionals need to know are most importantly that we all kind of come from a unique perspective with disability. I think it's important to remember that everybody's journey, being comfortable and being aware and being in ability is very different. So understanding that just because you meet two amputees doesn't mean that they're at the same place and that they're functioning in the same way, and that their emotional health and their physical health can be very different and varied. So really being able to be aware of that and allow people to kind of meet you where they are. I think that can be definitely a hiccup. It also could be a success when you're very aware of it and you can do that successfully.
I'll go next. This is Alyssa. I think that for me as a HEP professional, it's very, very important for my colleagues in the social work profession and other related fields to understand that your acquired knowledge as a professional does not trump or supersede the lived experiences or the authoritative knowledge that disabled people have. So understanding kind of your place in a way and understanding the disability experience, whether that is not your experience of your own. I think that sometimes we go by the knowledge that we have in our trainings and education and think that those perspectives are the truth when they come from typically non-disabled people. So understanding that the biases that you have from the education or from your own perspectives can really influence the way that you engage with disabled people and the way that you listen or do not listen to what they have to say about their bodies and their experiences and the obstacles that they have to go through and living in our ableist world. So understanding your own place in that, understanding the privileges that you have and how you can be an agent of empowerment or help, or be an agent of harm, and being very intentional about being an empowerer, an advocate, and working alongside disabled folks, and not thinking that you have to be the pioneer or the savior of disabled people.
Yeah, this is Anjali, and I'll add to this that I think that, you know, to build on what's already been said, you know, there's a lot of intersectional natures related to the disability community that we also have to be aware of. So individuals, as was said, you know, with particular types of impairments and conditions they may vary greatly, but they also may be co-occurring. So there may be, you know, different experiences of somebody who's a deaf wheelchair user, or a person who uses a power wheelchair who also experiences depression and so forth. And as rehabilitation practitioners, I think it's important to be aware of these intersecting identities and to be cautious that we're not promoting a single disability narrative, whatever that might be. A few other tangible kind of suggestions and are, you know, being able to ask and respect the choice of terminology. Whenever in doubt, just ask. Particularly for rehabilitation counselors, I think embracing principles of universal design are really important. So being as inclusive as you can be right from the start, you know, depending on where you're at in your job trajectory or internships or things like that. Does the website that you work at include access notes about accessible parking, or access notes about events that you might be hosting, paths of travel, alternative forms of your intake forms, for example? If a person were to call your office, are they able to easily and efficiently receive answers to these questions? I think the other piece too is really being able to, as a rehabilitation practitioner, act as an ally to the disability community. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this over the afternoon. But do you call out somebody who's parked blocking the ramp or the access aisle? Like, are you comfortable being that vocal ally in those types of spaces? What does it say if your colleague or your peers' private practice is in an inaccessible location? Do you bring it up with that person? You know, things of that nature.
So that was all very good, and it really all comes down to listening and learning from disabled people. The training that you get from neurotypicals and like from able people is probably flawed, and you should be critical of it, and you should always be trying to improve your knowledge of these things by listening to actual disabled people's voices, and learning how to communicate with neurodivergent people if you're working with us. And I think the other important thing is to always presume competence and presume effort, and never think that, you know, like others said, don't think that you're trying to save people, but assume that they know what they're doing and are doing the best they can, and you're only there to help.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have a brief question here. Someone is stating that I actually work with deaf and hard of hearing, and I've been immersed in the deaf culture for 30 years. Is there a question there? And while we are waiting, okay, there's not a question, thank you. And based on the comments from our panelists, if you had the opportunity just to say to those who are doing the training and those who are early in their training, what advice would you give them on how to be an assertive advocate on behalf of people with disabilities?
I would like to actually address that, the statement that was in the chat, because I think we see a lot of that in the work that we do. We see a lot of professionals that say that I work with disabled folks and I'm immersed in the culture. And just because you work with people doesn't make you immersed in the culture necessarily. You may be very versed on things. You may have, more intimate knowledge, but that doesn't mean that you are part of that community if you're not actually a part of that community. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about authoritative knowledge versus acquired knowledge. You being immersed in a certain community is acquired knowledge. That does not mean that you have that lived experience to where you can use that as identity. And I think sometimes that can be a hiccup for professionals who think that, oh, I've been doing this work for years, then that makes me, a person that can be a voice for disabled people, and not knowing how to pull oneself aside and think about, instead of trying to be that savior, how can I work alongside disabled folks? How can, I create opportunities for disabled people to, live independently, to live interdependently in their communities? How can I use my privilege as a professional? Because let's face it, us as professionals do have a privilege. People will listen to us before they listen to disabled folks. So understanding that privilege means that you can, unintentionally use your voice in a way that can be heard louder than disabled people's voices. So understanding that power imbalance in a way, and how disabled people perspectives can be dismissed because they're disabled, but you as a person who's not disabled, or at least not visibly disabled, can come in and be considered a voice or someone of authority on disabilities when that's not necessarily your lane. So being very conscious of that privilege that being a professional can gain you, that can work unintentionally against you, and not being a better co-conspirator, ally, a change agent working with disabled folks.
Yeah, and I just want to add a couple things to that, and I also want to amplify something that Melissa just said, that especially for new rehabilitation professionals, she very intentionally used the term interdependence, and very often in disability rehabilitation counseling programs, rehabilitation psychology, and so forth, we gravitate towards this term of independence, and the intentionality of the term interdependence shows that we as a community are actually advocating that we have agency and say over our lives, but that you don't necessarily have to accomplish all of these tasks physically independently, but rather I might be in control over my life and be a part of the process of hiring and firing personal care attendants, for example, and still receiving those help, the assistance that might be needed with activities of daily living. For individuals with other types of disabilities, many of us actually rely on the technological devices as assistive technologies. I'm directionally challenged and could not function without a GPS, and so I independently could not navigate from point A to point B. But we as a society are actually embracing this thing of interdependence much better. And so I just wanted to amplify that part in something that Melissa said. I would also add that for new professionals, I think being aware of the current disability issues that are facing the community, especially if you are working with communities that are affected and that have disabilities. So being knowledgeable and up to date about these current issues is essential towards being that true ally and being able to meet the needs of the clients that you might be working with. I also think it's important to note that those of us who are disabled, we're not immune to this. Practitioners and counselors with disabilities also have to do this hard work of checking our own internalized and preconceived notions of disability. So, we might inadvertently or unintentionally privilege certain disability groups or ways of thinking about disability that hides other intersectional aspects of identity. So, and an example of this is it can be oftentimes, even with gatherings like this, we tend to privilege individuals who are verbal, who have the ability to verbalize in terms of the nature of their disability. And so that's one example of really trying to be intentional about checking those internal biases that we all may have.
Thank you. And Angelina, we do have a question that goes along those same lines that I will go ahead and share with everyone. The question says, are there any pointers when working with individuals that are still fighting, AKA shadowboxing, themselves and identity or identities? It is troubling how many individuals are not comfortable in their own skin or with themselves. It is very difficult to stop the negative self-script.
Can I talk about that one? I read that a few minutes ago, and I was like, that is very much a reality. But I think you have to remember, though, that is very much a reality with a lot of people, disabled or not. I think that mental health in general is something that we all are kind of struggling with, especially in the era of all kind of be confined to homes. But just specifically to what you were speaking about, like how do you reroute that negative self-talk? Well, you can't. You really can't. You can encourage. You can give them information, but you have to be very careful that you're not, projecting what you feel like their self-esteem is from your perspective. But the reality is there's not a whole lot you can do. We all come to our level of confidence in our own time. Some of us were very young and we were like, no big deal, I'm good. And some of us are still not there. And that is always going to be a spectrum and of acceptance of our own limitations and difficulties. And the only thing you can really do is put the information out there and go and put it out there kind of as benignly as you can, because you don't want to necessarily be like, I think you're depressed and we need to deal with that. What you can do, though, is make that an option, as a lot of other services under your care are an option, and being aware that, yes, people could need this. Try to steer those conversations around positive self-talk as much as you can. But the reality is that is kind of a personal journey that everybody kind of has to get to, and you can't rush it. It actually comes as it comes. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts about that. Just reading that question earlier, I was thinking about that's an interesting place to be. But I appreciate that people recognize that we are not all in the same place, but know that would be true no matter what job you were in. And so how would you handle it in that situation, in any situation? So.
And there's more to it than just like self-confidence, because we all grew up in this very toxic ableist culture that tells us disabled people are inferior. Nobody wants to be inferior, so of course people will try to conceal that about themselves and suppress it and try to assimilate and deny themselves. And we call it internalized ableism. Other than addressing it on a personal level, it's also really important that all of us work actively to dismantle that culture and replace it with one of acceptance. When it comes to the realm of autistic self-advocacy, I've found a lot of times when people finally get to experience autistic space and autistic community and become comfortable being around other people like them, it really helps to empower them and be more confident in themselves to take that mask off and really be themselves. But that's a very courageous thing to do, because society on so many levels actively pushes us to conform and assimilate, whether it's healthy for us or not. So it's very important for people to do that, but it should be understood that it's very difficult and it takes time.
It does. I'm going to piggyback on that really quickly. Somebody in the comments said, it's really sobering to hear someone with a disability say that there's nothing you can do. Like, well, remember, this isn't you guys aren't Captain Save a disabled person. Like, it's not Captain Save a Crip. Like, that's not what it is. Like, you're there to provide information that you would provide to anybody else in the same situation. Like, if you come into your job, into your professions going, I'm going to save all the disabled people from themselves, you're going to do it wrong, and you're going to do it badly, and you're going to do it offensively. If you come into the situation saying, if I were sitting in that seat, what would I want somebody to say to me? You'll be just fine.